Today we're going to be talking a little bit about Search Console, SEO, higher rankings, more money, all of those types of things. So hopefully you're in the right place. I'm guessing you are. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, I am Tyler Bishop. I am the CMO here at Ezoic. We've been doing these daily webinars, and I've done a few of them now, so I might be getting some repeat watchers. And if that's the case, welcome back. Otherwise, for those who don't know me, I helped found Google's Pubtelligence, which is a global event that we do along with Google for publishers, hosted at Google offices around the world. I've served as a digital SEO expert for startup competitions. I come from the world of startups. I've started several different tech businesses early on in my career, and largely served as a competition judge for marketing plans that different startups would come up with for different states that actually had grants that they would give to tech businesses. Now I serve as a lot of different things here at Ezoic, but one of which that I hope that maybe we have a listener or two on today is the Publisher Lab podcast, where we go through different news of the week. So if you are a podcast listener, I encourage you to check out the Publisher Lab. And then I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, which will briefly come into play here, and you'll see why here in a little bit. I'm a semi-retired magician. If you've ever joined any of our events at Google, you know that I try to do some magic. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. And I'm a dog person, so if you hear a dog barking in the background, I have two Shiba Inus, and one of them likes to bark and the other one doesn't. So if you hear it in the background, it's because I'm like many of you, and I'm working from home during the pandemic. So if you're watching this after the fact, you may, hopefully maybe we're through the pandemic, who knows? But the Ezoic Education Series is a daily webinar series that we're doing right now, mainly to provide just different insights and access to experts around everything from using Ezoic to improving your site and growing it. And we are recording all of these, and we are working on formalizing them into different courses and things along those lines. But right now, we're just trying to give everyone a diverse set of information and content, and just diverse experts as well. So lots of different experts, everything from the world of SEO to infrastructure. And actually yesterday, Wednesday, Doug Cunnington was on, and he talked a little bit about growing niche sites. And so he is the founder of the Niche Sites Project, and he's a really great source of information. So if you didn't have a chance to check that out, it is on our recordings page already now. It is ezoic.com/ezoic-education-courses. I do make this presentation available. You should get notifications from Zoom that the recordings are available, but you can access all these things in your Ezoic dashboard as well. Tomorrow, we're talking about uncovering pages with hidden revenue on your site. So looking for areas of your site that maybe have revenue potential that you haven't figured out, or maybe there's something wrong with them and you can identify that. And then Monday and Tuesday, we have two really great guests. Monday, Tyler Benedict, the founder and CEO of BuyFirmer.com, is going to be talking about how he sells sponsored content to brands, and he's done a really good job of it. And then Leanne Angus, he's a YouTuber and entrepreneur, and he talks a lot about affiliate marketing and SEO. And he's going to come on and talk a little bit about how he blends that with display ads, and how he's been able to use SEO to grow different sites and properties he has, and some of the different principles that he uses along the way. So all of these recordings are on the URL that I've provided there, and they're also on our YouTube channel on a special unlisted playlist you can access from your Ezoic dashboard. And that's it. So I'm going to hop in, and so today the primary learning will occur outside of a slide presentation, and we're going to go live into Search Console. I'm going to talk a little bit about what matters and where you go in Search Console. If you don't have it set up already, hopefully this can give you that inspiration to go do it. I mean, obviously, super recommend it for a lot of different reasons, which you'll see. We're going to be talking about how you diagnose any potential losses in traffic and figure out where that's happening and why. If Google's penalizing your site, why is that? And how do you just do the bare minimum there so that you can make sure that you're basically not running afoul of Google. So I'm going to hop over here to, I've got Search Console set up on this site. This is an owned and operated site that we use for testing a lot of times. And one of the things that I wanted to be able to use here is, you can see this site has seen a decline in traffic during this period. So once you get into Search Console, you're going to get the left-hand menu over here. Usually you'll have to set up either a tag on your site, use Google Analytics, or do something with the DNS to, if you have lots of subdomains, to get your site set up on Search Console. It couldn't be easier if you haven't already. But once you do, you'll be dropped here initially. So one of the first areas that I like to basically go and explore inside of Search Console is performance. So inside of performance, at the top here, this is sort of where you're going to be able to kind of set exactly what data you want to look at to get a start. So one of the things I think that is often maybe missed with Search Console is that in these filters, we're looking at just web search results, but you could also look at image if you have a lot of images in Google search, and even video as well. And I think this will come in even greater play later on as Ezoic starts offering more and more video solutions to publishers, because I think there is a big opportunity for video and SEO completely outside of YouTube, but on your own site. And we'll probably talk about that in a future webinar. And so that gives you your first basic criteria. And then the next is usually going to be something you pick around date range. And the default is 3 months here. But in our case, actually, you know what, that's a pretty good period of time. I generally really like to compare stuff. But before we get to compare, I want to kind of outline a couple things about the way the Search Console works, because it's maybe not as intuitive as you might think. So very first thing is when you click these different squares up here, you're going to be able to see the data. So whenever I take away these squares and I just look at clicks, all I'm doing now is looking at the information here related to clicks. So you can see that's the only one displaying here. Now when I go and add impressions, you can see the impressions data is added. And what we're looking at now is queries. So we're looking at how many times did this query, 381 meaning, get clicked inside of Google search results during this time period on the web, and how many times did it appear. So impressions mean it showed up in search results, clicks means it was clicked on. So you're going to see clicks inside of Google Analytics or Big Data Analytics as basically page views to that landing page or landing page views. And what you're going to see impressions with is really through no other source other than through Google. Even those tools like SEMrush or Ahrefs or something like that, that data is really projected data. It's not real, meaning that it's basically an estimate. So this is giving you the actual data that Google has on different queries and pages. So that's the next part here is I can select all the different metrics here at the top, and then I can see the queries, but then I can also see the pages here. So what's cool about this is I may want to see this page, for example. So internet slang, POV. I'm guessing POV in this case is meaning point of view, probably what that URL is about. But I can click on this here, and you can see it gets added to the top. So now the data that I'm looking at is my web search data for the last 3 months, and I'm looking at internet slang, this particular URL. So I'm only looking at this URL. I could also change it to any URLs containing a certain slug. So if I wanted to just look at, you know, a branch of my site that was articles, maybe, or blogs, or maybe I put my categories as a subfolder on my site. So it's a way for you to be able to also look at groups of content as well if you have that by URL. But nevertheless, now I'm just looking at these same charts and graphs, but I'm only looking at this URL in that date period. So now you say, well, now you're only looking at one page here. What good does that do? Well, now I can go back and I can look and I can see all the actual queries that I have here related to this search. So I can see there's over 651 results or 651 pages or so. If I open this up quite a bit, you can see this URL is getting a lot of traffic, but not just from one keyword. It's getting it from a lot, and most of them are similar. So you can see POV meaning, POV means, what does POV mean, what is POV? Now, these are all different, but I can see for each of these queries, my rankings are different, my CTR is different, and even my impressions are different. So one of the things I might want to do here is look at what is getting the most impressions. So I can see that what does POV mean gets a lot of impressions. I rank number 5 for, but my CTRs pretty low here. And I can see here, I get a 1% CTR for POV meaning. So one of the things I might want to do here is go and look at my title tag on my website. So if we go and we look at POV meaning inside of search, so we can see dictionary.com doing a great job of getting that rich snippet here. But then below that, where are we at? So here we are. So what does POV mean? POV definition, meaning of POV. So you can see this is sort of the structure being tried here with the title tag. So we could try a different take on the title tag. We can maybe look at what some of the other results are doing. We probably want to stand out, but this is something that we could then test to see if we wanted to maybe improve it. My guess is the content is fairly thin on this. It's kind of a commodity piece of information. So it's one of those ones that we may want to look at a little bit closer, but it's one way that I could try now to maximize my search traffic, because look, this is getting 216,000 plus impressions. I'm ranking number 5 for it, but my CTR is the biggest reason why I'm getting 606 clicks in this time period versus 1,900 clicks from basically something that I ranked the exact same position for, but I'm actually getting fewer impressions on, and it's probably partially related to CTR or maybe even the intent of the user. But this is the type of thing that I might want to look at in search. Now, the next thing that I might want to look at is diagnosing ranking losses or basically traffic losses. I think anytime someone loses traffic, their default thought is that they've lost rankings. And while that might be true, I'm becoming more and more convinced that oftentimes when sites lose organic traffic, it's largely more related to changes that Google makes in the search results themselves, more so than the actual ranking position. And I'll try to give you guys an example of that here in just a minute. So you can see I've gone back to my date range filter at the top. And now, instead of just going to filter, I'm going to click the compare tab. And now I'm going to compare the last 3 months to the previous period of time. So it's going to look at the last 3 months, and then it's going to look at the exact same number of days prior to that. So basically 3 months prior, and I'm going to click apply. And so you can see here now, it's telling me the last 3 months, I had 2.5 million clicks, and the previous 3 months, I had 2.9. So if you're looking at this and thinking, I think I lost some traffic, Search Console is confirming it. In fact, what I find the most interesting here is that my total impressions have gone up. So 263 million impressions versus 251 million in the time period before. So I'm appearing more in search results, but I'm getting clicked on less. What's going on? We can see my CTR is probably playing a role here because I've got a 1% CTR versus a 1.2% CTR in the previous period. So that's lending itself to a little bit. And so this is kind of what I was talking about just a moment ago, because what we're seeing now is, look, my average position 6.7 and my previous was 6.7. So we're going to have to dig into the details exactly because it's going to depend on the exact queries. But just because I've lost traffic in this case doesn't mean overall I've lost rankings. Some of my URLs may have, some of them haven't, almost assuredly so. But in this case, you can see my average ranking position is actually the same here. So when I start looking at all this data together, it gets kind of hard to look at everything in an even format. So one of the things I really like to do is I want to focus in on where I've actually lost the traffic. So I'm going to get rid of impressions, I'm going to get rid of CTR, and I'm going to get rid of average position for right now. And I'm going to go over here, and you can see now, because I've only selected one of the boxes here at the top, Google is now giving me difference here. And this is a really big one for me because I want to see where have I lost the traffic. So I can now click here and it's going to sort my traffic. Now, when I click it the first time, it's going to show me where I've gained, but I want to see where I've lost. So when I click it twice, I'm going to see all the queries where I've lost the most traffic. So I can see this is by far the one that I've lost the most traffic on, UWU meaning. So I'm going to click on it. So now I'm just looking at this query. So I know that I've lost a lot of traffic here. So I can see it's 17,000 visits versus 2,000 visits or clicks. there's a chance that my page didn't load and they came back, so I might not see all those visits, but that's a big loss. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this, and I'm going to click on average position. So you can see this is a direct result of me dropping some positions here. So 2.3. So I was basically ranking number 2 before, and now I'm ranking almost 6. So it's a pretty big drop, and that's a pretty big difference. And you can see that the CTR goes from 4% to 0.4%. And that probably has a lot to do with my position insert. So I probably want to go and take a look at that actual query here. So I can see, once again, dictionary.com doing a really great job of getting that rich snippet here. I might want to take a look at how they've basically structured their page, because they may be providing something to their visitors that I'm not. So if we go ahead and just open that, I'm going to come down. I'm going to find our listing here. So here we go. What does UWU mean? UWU, so you can see that similar title tag kind of framework here. So we can see here, right here, they go with a different style of title tag. I doubt that that's making a huge difference here. But if we go and we look at the results of the 2 pages, so dictionary.com, I'm getting this floating ad, which is pretty annoying here on dictionary.com. But if I just, well, I'd love to get rid of it, but I can't. Boy, that's a pretty terrible experience, huh? But either way, on dictionary.com, I've got the definition right here, right in the middle. It's big and bold. They do have it sort of surrounded by some ads here, but my guess is that this one probably doesn't load all the time. Maybe it does. But they give me a lot of different options here, and maybe that's good for the user. So let's take a look at the one here for internet slang. So I go down, and you notice the actual term itself it's not prominent up at the top. So I've got, you know, a bunch of other trending terms. I've got this here at the top. I've got my search bar. I've got what does it mean here, and then I've got an ad, and then I've got the definition here. But the definition doesn't stick out to me. So not only does it not stick out to me, but it also features these other ones where it's very possible that scrolling through here, I would miss that definition on this page. Meanwhile, dictionary.com, it's a little bit more prominent. So I can see, at least on a desktop device, why that might be something that a user, whenever they get the results here, they find what they're looking for. So I think it's really important to ask yourself those types of questions when you're really digging into this stuff, because if you do find a query like this where you've clearly lost ranking positions, and we go and we look at it, I've lost a pretty big amount of traffic, it's worth taking an objective look at it. So what I might want to do now is go and then look at some of my other queries as well. But instead of looking at queries now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at pages. So now I'm going to look at the difference between not just the query itself, but I'm going to look at the difference in pages. So you can see this page, the same one, I didn't just lose rankings for that one query. If I pick this URL again, you're going to see that on average, all the queries, so now I'm going to click back on average ranking position. I'm going to go to queries. I'm just looking at this page. And you're going to be able to see here that my average ranking position dropped for all these queries. So there's a lot. Look at that, 146 pages of results. So it's this terminology in general that I'm not providing basically Google what it's looking for in this case now. So I do think that you want to look at something like this and just ask yourself a question of, like, looking at the other results and saying, what is the user's intent here? Am I providing a better or worse search experience? And, you know, sometimes you look at it and say, I think mine's better if you're a publisher. And sometimes that, I mean, it's subjective, but maybe that's the case. But a lot of times I will say that when I do this, I always find things that I find beneficial for me personally. So I'm going to kill that here, and we're going to go back and look at one more thing. So now, as I'm going back and I'm looking at all my results here at large, one of the things that I might want to take a look at as well is things like devices and countries as well. So going in and looking at something like mobile, desktop, tablet. So you remember a moment ago I said the desktop experience for dictionary.com maybe was a little bit more prominent. That was one of the things that stuck out to me from a user perspective. I could see how maybe that would be better. So we can see that that's where I've really seen the biggest difference in terms of ranking. So it may be the area that I want to go and explore, because if we look at it, remember my average is the same, but then by device on desktop is where I've actually been damaged the most in terms of ranking. So it'd be worth me looking at my actual desktop results. So there's a lot that you can find here. Typically inside a Search Console, this is where I spend a gross majority of my time, is really looking at performance in terms of being able to compare stuff, figuring out why I gained traffic, why I lost it. I know it's really tempting to only go look when you lose, but when you gain traffic too, you can, a lot of times you can pinpoint things that are really valuable. Like a lot of times people think, all right, great, the Google algorithm benefited me. But what you learn is that really it's just one keyword that you happen to snag. And realistically, you might not be doing the awesome job of SEO that you thought you were, and you just got a new URL that happens to be ranking super high. And you don't want to fool yourself in that way, and make sure that you aren't missing fundamental drops in rankings for all your URLs that are maybe hidden because one is doing particularly well. So I'm going to get over here on the left side of the screen now, and I'm going to look at things like coverage. So coverage is a really good place to go look. Google Search Console will send you alerts a lot of the times. A lot of times there are false warnings. If you get a bunch of them, sometimes I would say 1 in 5 actually ends up being something to work on, and the other 4, it's like, where did this come from? But they're always worth paying attention to. You can actually see all the previous ones up here in this. Click the bell here. It's not letting me click it here, maybe because of Zoom. Let's see. No, there we go. So you can see these are all the emails actually that Search Console has sent me, and so that's something you can utilize. Then I've got my errors here, so you can see I've got some server errors here. It looks like they disappeared. I could then test these URLs. So you got a couple different buttons here, but the button, it looks like a square with an arrow sticking out of it. If you click that, it'll take you to the page so I can actually see, am I getting a server error on this page? Well, there's a comma in the URL, so that's still getting me to the page. So I'm not getting a 500 error. So this looks like something that's probably not an issue anymore. And if we go back and we look at our coverage report, we can see that it looks like it's detecting through, but I can actually click on that URL now. I go back there. Click on this URL, and I've got this one over here. And I can actually say now, validate the fix. So Google will now say, okay, we'll go back, and if you say you fix that, we will check again, and Google will actually give you the details. So it's telling me now that it's pending. It's going to take another look to see if it's getting these errors, and you can see that it's in the process. I have not failed yet. It's something that I have to go back and look at now, and that is a part of what we have to do here. So moving forward with some of the other aspects of Search Console here, I'm going to go back to coverage. And now we are not looking at all of them here, but what we can see is that I don't have any valid with a warning or something like that. You can see all your valid ones here. So these are indexed, but they might not be submitted in my sitemap. It's worth figuring out why that is. I'm going to get the sitemaps here in a minute and why that's so important. But we go to excluded. This is a key one, especially if you have a lot of URLs. If you have a lot of URLs, you want to go in and check this, because so in this case, you've got canonicals and things like that. So when you have redirects, you have www versions and things like that. As long as you have a canonical set, that's fine. Google is going to exclude those, and that's a fine thing. What you want to really look for is basically a crawled, currently not indexed. So in some cases, this is good. You have pages on your site you don't want Google to index. You have URLs that maybe are images or files, or even CSS and JavaScript or pixels. You don't want Google crawling that stuff. However, if you start to scroll through here and you find you have actual pages here, so let's see, I've got one here, internetslang.com/homeboy. So I can click on this now, and I might want to figure out that seems like a URL maybe that does exist. So let's see. If I go to that URL here, does it exist? Does it redirect me someplace else? I think there's actually a space in here. That might be why. Either way, the URL exists. It doesn't look actually like there is a space here. So this seems like something I definitely would want indexed in search. So maybe I'm blocking it. So you can see I can test the robots.txt file here. I'm going to click on that. And you can see here, Google says allowed. So it's indexable. I'm not blocking it. So Google just hasn't crawled it. So I can click on inspect URL here and see if Google tells me why they're not crawling this URL. And it doesn't know why. It just says currently not indexed. So I can click here and say request indexing. And Google will start testing this to make sure it can. We already checked the robot.txt file, so we know that it can get indexed. So now through this test, it should be able to tell me that. And if it can, this will add it to Google's index. And this is one of the biggest reasons why having a sitemap submitted to Google is so important. So I'm going to go ahead and let that finish. Sometimes it can take a little while. If I go over here now on my left-hand side and go to sitemaps, you can see I've never submitted a sitemap to Google Search Console with this site. So what typically a sitemap URL is, it's usually like sitemap or .xml or site underscore something at XML. I think on our server error, I saw what our URL was for this one. Yeah, so in our case, it's this one right here. So I'm going to click on it, make sure I don't get a server error. That would be bad. But if you're a WordPress site, WordPress is finally going to get native sitemap support, but there's a lot of plugins that do it. If you're a Yoast user, Yoast automatically creates a sitemap for you. You can go into your settings of Yoast, and you can actually just get your sitemap XML URL, and that's what you would submit here. So there's actually only a handful of like URLs it could be. It can be your site.com / usually something along these lines in terms of URLs like sitemap.xml or site underscore map at .xml or something along those lines. But either way, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to throw the end of that URL here. You can see I am getting that 500 server error here. So I probably need to make sure this is an XML file. And it is. So there we go. So the sitemap here is sitemap.xml. And now I'm just going to click submit. Oh, and it tells me I couldn't fetch. So that might not be my actual sitemap URL for this. So I need to go find that, because what will happen, and so I've got another example here for us, luckily. And you can see if we actually go back, where was our sitemap URL inspection? There we go. Just to revisit this, the indexing was requested. So the URL was added as a priority to crawl and add to the index from earlier. So going back to our sitemap, I didn't have my URL for this one, but I've got a site over here. And remember, I said that Jiu-Jitsu would come back into play. So this is one of my sites. It's a Jiu-Jitsu website. And if we go over here to sitemaps, you can see I've done a good job here. I've got one index. It's sitemap_index.xml. It's another common one. And you can see that the status is success and that it discovered 1,000 URLs. And I can actually click here, and that's what it's reading from my coverage. So it's actually telling me I've got some errors here. So it tells me that I submitted a URL in my sitemap and there's an error. So I'm going to click on that. And now I'm going to go through and I'm looking at some of these and their images. So I'm like, well, of course, these are my images. Maybe I need to make sure that those aren't in my sitemap. But, I'm not seeing any URLs that I want to send traffic to that maybe it's missing. And then I can go through and I can start to identify in particular URLs here that maybe I want to dig into more and make sure that Google is going through. But there's actually another issue on this site that I found earlier, and that's what I want to dig into. So coverage issues are important. You want to be able to look at why Google's excluding URLs. Valid isn't really something you have to look at for the most part, unless the vast majority of URLs aren't valid, then you need to figure out why. The errors I really am mostly concerned about figuring out when I've got a large number of errors on URLs that I've submitted via my sitemap, or if I've got redirect errors. Sometimes that's something to take a close look at as well. Also, crawled but not indexed. You want to just make sure, are there real URLs that I have content on that Google is not including in search results? And that's an important one for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, you want to get traffic to those URLs in search. The other area that I'll point to here is not all of you will have this, but some of you will, for different snippets or schema markup that you may have added to your site, or a plugin like Yoast or something like that, if your WordPress site may have added for you. You will have these different enhancements here where I've got site link search box, I've got review snippets. I click on review, and you can see here that I've got 5 errors for review schema that I've added to my website. So I clicked on the missing field, and it's telling me basically that I've marked up my content with this review information. So I've marked up my content with schema, which is telling Google basically what my article or what my page is about. And you can do this for reviews, for recipes, for a lot of different things. A lot of you will be familiar with this. In my case, I've written a review of a jiu-jitsu uniform, and you can see here it's got an error, and it looks like it's missing the item name. So if I click on this, I might not know how to fix this. I'm like, great, Google, like I want to fix it, but as far as I know, like Yoast is maybe doing this, or who knows. So I see here it's telling me where in the code that is, and I'm like, well, once again, Google, great, but I still don't know what to do with this. And so what I can do now is I can actually click on this, and I can inspect the URL. So clicking that little, so it shows me that it's been crawled, but I have an unnamed item here. So this may look more familiar to some of you because most plugins or a lot of the free tools that will add schema markup will ask for this type of information. So you can see what I'm missing here is item review. So I've got some information here. It's telling you specifically you need to fill in this criteria. So wherever it is you fill in your schema data on this URL, you need to go in and fill that in. You might still say, Tyler, I have a really hard time with this. Where do I go? If you have a schema plugin, most of the time they will have something there that you can do that with, or whatever tool you're using to add that. And I'll get the custom markup here in a minute. But in my case, I went to the site and realized that I actually have my Yoast plugin is out of date. And actually by updating it, the review item schema is something that was added in the last year or so, and I don't think the site's been touched in a while. So I would probably want to update my Yoast plugin in this case. The other option that I have is, and I will give links to all these different URLs and tools that I'm using at the end here. So, and I do see a question now, somebody asking about sitemaps and submitting a sitemap only once. Anytime I make a major update to my site, especially if I update my sitemap or figure out errors, I will resubmit a sitemap. Google will actually tell you, just going back to sitemaps briefly, the last time you submitted it, and then the last time it was read. So actually, you can see the last time it was read was June 4th. So it's read my sitemap relatively recently. So submitting it isn't necessary. Every now and then I may make some updates, and so it's a couple days later. So it may be worth it for me to go back and update this if I've got some changes or fixes related to the sitemap. But getting back to our review snippets here, the last thing that I'll mention is, so this is my review here. If I wanted to go in and add this physically to the URL itself, Google has actually a tool that will help me with this. And so I can actually go over here to products. I can select what type of content it is. Depending on what you see in Search Console, it'll give you a pretty good idea of what type of structured data markup you'll need. You'll need the URL here. I'm gonna go ahead and add it. And Google's not going to load my page. And actually, this is a fairly easy tool to use because it's going to give me it's going to show me my page. And all it's going to ask now is that I go through and I'm going to just, at each of these different areas, it's going to ask me to highlight on the page where these things are. So it's going to ask me for the product first. So I can go over here and I go over and I go name. And then I might say, let's see, I think it probably asks for author. So the author in this case is that. So let's see, actually it doesn't ask for that. Oh, reviewer, here we go. So I can just go through this and fill in, and you can see here, it's filling in all the information for me over here. So once that's done, I can say create the HTML, and then it's gonna tell me add this script block below the head section on that central page. So this information, once you finish marking it up, Google will actually give this to you, and you can just drop this on the head or right below the head on that page, and that way you can fix your schema data. There's a lot more inside of Search Console, but one of the things that I think is probably most beneficial for Ezoic users to understand is how SEO and the different things they do inside of Search Console and just keyword research and just their content in general connects to their revenue. And this is a big point of emphasis with Ezoic, is to improve the ability for people to understand the ROI of something like SEO, where it's kind of murky, subjective in a lot of ways. So we want to try to make things as objective as possible. So in our case here, I'm on this site, and if I connect my Search Console data after it's set up to Ezoic, which is very easy to do inside of your Ezoic dashboard, all you have to do is go up to the top after logging in, and you'll see a square that says SEO. You click on that, and it'll ask you to connect your Search Console, and then you just log right into Google, and it'll be connected. And once that data has parsed through, we'll be able to pull the data in, and we'll be able to see here basically all that same information, but now we can connect it to things like your revenue, your EPMB. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag EPMB and revenue. You can see here you can drag and drop these columns all the way over here. So now I can see that this particular search query produced about 3,000 visits during this week. It earned me about $19 in revenue, and my EPMB was about $6. So it's a good query, but it's about half of what my average EPMB is on this site during this time period for looking at just the Search Console data. You can see here I've got one over here. So when I'm looking at this particular query versus this one, I can see that the traffic is almost exactly the same, but look at the revenue difference. $19 to $44 in a week from one query, not even the variations of it, just one particular search. And you can see the EPMB is the reason why. So one is half my normal EPMB. The other one is about 25% higher. So that makes a really big difference. So if I'm investing my time in SEO, I'm going to want to start maybe looking at the pages and the queries that are associated with this particular term compared to the other one. So then you might ask the question, well, where do I invest my time? So what queries are generating the highest EPMB? So I'm going to go ahead and sort this. So what this is going to do is going to tell me what my highest EPMB query was during this time period. And wow, look out, folks, a $507 EPMB. Man, you'd think I'd just be, how am I getting an average of $11? Well, you can see I've only got one visit to this particular query. So it's not really fair. In fact, if you look at all these EPMBs, they're pretty stunning, couple $100 EPMBs, nice, right? But the data, we just don't have enough of it to actually know if I was to get 10,000 visits to that query, if it's going to replicate that, and it probably wouldn't. So one of the things I want to do is maybe add a filter to only include visits that are greater than, let's say, in this time period, let's say 100. So now I'm going to get a much more accurate representation of the data. So if I add that filter where I say I only want to see the queries that have more than 100 visits in a week. So my date range here you can see is October, the first week of October it looks like. And when I go through here now, I can see my EPMB for these queries here are $27, $25. So, more than double my average EPMB for these articles. And so this is giving me a really good idea. So I can see that there's a lot on, in this case, iOS 13. So my guess is a lot of these are going to the same URL. So it may be worth it for me to figure out, okay, where is my average position here? So I can see my average position. I'm ranking pretty high. So it might be hard for me to get more traffic to these queries by going in and really focusing on that URL that is associated with that search query. Because if I was ranking maybe, let's look here. You can see in this case, I've got one URL here that's getting a slightly higher EPMB. My average position is 11, and I'm getting a lot of visits from it. So it might be worth it for me to go in and see if I can't dial this up and get some more here. But it's really this one here that's got my attention, because it's about 80% higher than my average EPMB of queries that are getting this amount of search in this period of time. And my average position is 9, so I'm probably barely on page 1, if I'm on page 1 at all. It didn't generate a ton of revenue, but it's because maybe my traffic is stymied by that. So it may be worth me investing, going and looking at that query and what pages it's associated with to figure out, how do I go in and effectively improve that? Can I go into Search Console and do some of the things that we were talking about earlier to improve that URL? Because if I can improve the rankings to that, that is going to be a much better use of my time or someone on my team's time in terms of ROI for their SEO efforts, than basically just trying to figure out broadly what URLs and what articles is it worth updating or trying to improve, or improve the whole site as a whole. By being more targeted and specific about what articles I want to target here, I can make a lot more money on my site using this data. So I'll give you a couple other things that I think are really important to look at here. Is there's great data here on comparing. So if I click on compare, so just like we did in Search Console earlier, I'm going to compare basically the first week of October to the same number of days in the previous period. I'm going to click apply. And after I do that, I need to click run report. So I've got the data here, and you can see here, I'm getting a lot more visits in this time period. I'm making a lot more money, and my EPMB is up just slightly, but you can see the EPMB going up accounts for the slight increase of revenue over visits, but you can see visits up 192%, revenue up 193%. So if I'm trying to figure out basically, hey, this is great, I got the Google algorithm update, maybe it did it for me, but remember, I was talking about this earlier. You don't want to fall into security. So maybe I want to figure out what in particular is driving this. So you can see here, it's a lot of those URLs that we're seeing the high EPMBs on. So there may be something here that I want to look at. So in this case, the reason why I picked this is because this particular topic barely existed before this. So this happened around the time that I believe Apple updated their iOS. And so all of a sudden, you're seeing this huge increase in the number of people searching for iOS 13. And so because of this, you're seeing a major increase in visits to these terms. You're seeing the same correlation with revenue and EPMB. And you want to basically be able to go through and see which queries did I really jump up in the rankings on? Like, what is the difference here? Is it really just the traffic, or have I done something to increase the rankings itself? So this is a great way to see the ROI of some of the efforts we just talked about before. So if you go in and you target a term, so let's say we target what happened to my friends, and let's say the week before you identified that it had a good EPMB and you wanted to increase it. So you went in and maybe you added some content, you beefed it up, you made it look real good. And then in the next following week, or maybe even the next month, you go and you take a look and you see that your traffic's increased. You can actually see how much revenue you made from the effort as well. So let's say it took you, I don't know, maybe it took you 10 minutes. It didn't take you long. You knew what you were talking about. You went in, or you had somebody on your team go in, and you can see now, well, you're getting a higher EPMB, your ranking increased, and you got more traffic. But what did that result for in terms of money? Well, if you spent only 10 minutes on it, look, you made around $43. So what that equates to is around about $250 an hour. If you want to break it down, because you spent 10 minutes on it, you do the math, 6 times, basically 40, 43. So yeah, about $250 an hour for the effort that you spent on this article. And that's what I mean, the ROI of SEO. And that's why I think these reports are so valuable. And I really like dragging the columns over and looking at revenue and EPMB alongside things like the average position. I also like looking at things like average engage time and bounce rate and things along those lines too. But it's really nice to be able to see EPMB, and these filters make it so that you don't trick yourself either into thinking, I just got to get traffic to this query with this $500 EPMB. By depending on your date range and depending on your traffic, you'll have a good idea of what filters for visits make sense in terms of being able to look at what content on your site is getting above average EPMBs and where you might want to focus your SEO attention. So that's it. I talked a little bit about some of these things. I didn't go back to the slide. Sorry, everybody that was hoping to see more PowerPoints. But these are the links and tools that I mentioned. They'll be available alongside the recording on the page that I mentioned earlier, Ezoic-courses, Ezoic-education-courses, Ezoic.com, Ezoic-education-courses, available on your Ezoic dashboard as an alert up at the top when you log in. But yeah, the Google schema markup tool, big data analytics, connecting it. If you're logged into Ezoic, you can just click that link and it'll take you right to that report we were looking at. And if you've never connected Search Console, I think there'll be a prompt right there asking you to do so. And then, yeah, we've got a blog on the Web Core Vitals as well. It's one area we didn't really get into, but Google has completely changed the way that they're trying to measure speed. Their reports are not great yet, and they kind of speak out of both sides of their mouths in terms of what they want publishers to do. But we've got some really great information available on this blog here that we wrote. And then also, I would also refer anyone concerned about speed to the webinar that I did a couple days ago on optimizing site speed with Ezoic. It's gotten a couple hundred publishers already that have looked at it and taken action on it. And I can tell you that the results from the publishers that made changes based on what they heard in the webinar to now, most of them have either doubled their site speed scores, significantly increased their site speed. So it's definitely worth checking out if you are like, oh, Ezoic makes my site slow. It's probably something that you can fix and adjust there, because Ezoic should be making almost all sites faster universally. So the only caveat to that is if you maybe weren't showing advertising before, in which case there are some mechanisms to actually make your site just as fast no matter what. So those are included as well. The last thing that I'll kind of plug here is all the resources that we do have available, because I keep finding the publishers are surprised when they find them, and most of the time they're helpful. So we've got a lot of these courses. You can go watch the past recordings. We have some in the future as well, more on big data analytics. If you guys looked at this today and were like, wow, this is really great info, there's a lot in there. And we have people showing you how to get different pieces of info that you might find really, really helpful throughout the next few weeks. We also have our YouTube channel where we have multiple playlists. We have one called Ezoic Explains that basically breaks down things that are not Ezoic related, how to do things that are important if you're any kind of publisher. We have Ezoic Academy, which will walk you through in a much more short form way how to do things using Ezoic. And then we also have the Publisher Spotlight, where we actually interview publishers like you and ask them about their strategies, what they're doing. Publishers that we find that are doing things successfully, we want them to share their experiences with you, and they do so on Publisher Spotlight. I already talked about our podcast. You know about the Ezoic blog and all the resources there. And once again, there's that URL for the recordings. So if you have more questions, I see I've got at least one here. And if you have others, please drop them in here. Otherwise, I want to thank you for joining us and watching again. I enjoy doing these and interacting with everyone. I think the more questions, the more chance that I have to interact with publishers, the more that I find that there's so many things inside of Ezoic that are valuable that go underutilized or unutilized. And I'm hoping that even if it's not related to Ezoic, if it's related to something like Search Console, these types of things are helpful for you and your business. And I see Helen has got a question here, but it's actually just a thank you. So no, thank you, Helen. Thanks for joining. Thanks for giving me time today, your valuable time. And I think that's it. So I'll wait here just one more minute and see if we get any more questions. And if we don't, I will leave you all today. Does it take time to load the data from Search Console into BDA? The answer to that is yes. It will take a little bit of time because we have to pull the API, but it shouldn't take long. And once we get the historical data in there, I believe that we can match things up. But if not, once the data is in, we'll begin tracking it at that moment. So it shouldn't take very long. Depending on how much traffic you get, usually after a week, you've got some pretty good data that you can run with. So I would just recommend connecting it no matter what. If it's not connected now, we are trying to do a better job of prompting people into that just so that they can have that kind of valuable information. And Helen says, is it possible to talk a little bit slower? Yeah, it is, Helen. I can definitely talk slower. It's probably it's an affliction that I suffer from, unfortunately. I'm always trying to give people as much information as possible. And probably why I'll never be a politician, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending. Thank you. All right, everyone, unless we have any more questions, I will leave you be. But thank you once again, and I encourage everybody to check out the webinar tomorrow where we'll be diving into a couple other spots inside of big data analytics. So if you thought today's information was helpful and you found something inside of there, you're like, wow, great, I could use that information. I promise you tomorrow you'll find the same thing. My good friend from the UK, Paul Round, will be joining, and he will be sharing some more information about finding pages with hidden revenue. So thank you very much, and I will talk to you again soon.